All right, well, it's 7, so let's get started. It is Tuesday, March 29th, 2022. It's 7 p.m. This is fifth Tuesday, so that's typically when we have our town hall meeting. We don't have any city business during this time. This is just a purpose of citizens coming and bringing up any topics that they want to discuss with the city commission. So with that, I'll open up the floor to anybody who'd like to come up and talk. And I know that Vicki Gurman would like to say something. I'll invite her up first, since she at least let me know ahead of time that she's going to be here. So go ahead.
All right. Thanks, Shannon. I am Vicki Gurman. I serve for a number of years on the Planning Commission. I currently serve on the Finney County Board of Zoning Appeals. And I just wanted to talk to you about an issue that we have kind of heard a lot of complaints about on both those commissions. And I also hear about it in the public quite a bit. And I thought maybe this is a time we should look at how can we work collaboratively with the county to come up with a solution. And that is with regard to code enforcement and I don't know if it's how complaints are handled. I'm sure there's a process, and I think it's a lengthy process. But specifically, we did create the ability in county zoning areas, residential zoning areas, for people to have a conditional use permit to park semis. That's beginning to be a pretty big issue in Garden City and Finney County with these owner-operators who don't have a place to park their truck, or they want to keep it nearby because there are issues with theft, you know, if they park it off their premises. So we did create that, and since we've done that, we've had some issues with neighbors not being too happy about it, and just a recent issue really brought that to light. And these folks, some of the neighbors were like, we, urge you not to approve any more of these conditional use permits until something is done about enforcement. Well, we can't do that. It's this guy that was there met all the stipulations in order to have a conditional use permit. We can't say, oh no, we're not going to give you yours. And I realize that they do have to abide by the stipulations that are in that conditional use permit. But the process seems to be difficult if people aren't cooperating with that or aren't doing what they said. And I hear the complaint all the time that, we have complained and complained. We call the city, we call the county, we do, and nothing happens. Well, I'm sure that something is happening. It just may not be on the time schedule that they are aware of, and I'm sure Trent could speak to this a little more informatively than I can. But I just wanted to talk to you about it and see if anybody has ideas on how we could collaborate, with the city and the county and try to come up with something that's going to work for everybody. I know that code enforcement is complaint driven. We obviously don't want, as my dad would call him, Barney One Bullet, driving around with the little pad, oh, here's, this guy's doing this wrong, and they're, giving tickets or something like that. But I think if we could come up with a process that works better and more expediently, I think that would be very helpful. So just wanted to make you aware. I did speak to the county commission about this as well, and they were very interested to hear, the things that we had to say. I had a couple more members of our commission there as well, and they are interested in collaborating and trying to see if we could come up with a system that maybe works a little bit better. So thanks for your time.
Right. Thank you, Vicki. Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about just the process that it goes through when we have complaints?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, Vicky's right. Code enforcement in Garden City and Finney County is complaint driven. Two different codes, two different processes. Same staff though,
right,
administering it. I guess which of those questions are suggested truths, or do you want me to address? I can tell you that code enforcement, I had them run a report following listening and trying to understand what the issue was, which really sounds primarily based towards, not like there's dissatisfaction with people's property or code for, I get that all over, but like what is it about the system that's not working? And to me at this point, it sounds like maybe a little bit of buyer's remorse on the county zoning side of things of hey, we heard this need for a place to park trucks, we made it a conditional use, now we've got it, now we don't really like it. And so, you know, it is a code enforcement subject matter issue. I would disagree that it's an enforcement issue because I think it is being enforced. It's being adhered to. I mean, what was allowed under the special use permits is practiced. Now, are there some nuances of people that have those conditional use that maybe not they're living up to every detail? That's obviously something that could be inspected on a complaint basis and adjudicated just like all of the other ones. To the notion that you know, what's being done and the process itself. Since January 1st of last year, there were 862 violations alleged, reported. You know, so if folks are saying, well, I called and nothing's done. A lot of the times, if someone leaves their name, we keep in contact with them. And at least I do those for the ones that come through me, and most of them don't come through me. But for ones that come through me and there's something other than anonymous, I try to report back it. Give them an expectation of the process that's there, and that's there for a reason. But 612 of those were closed. 250 still remain open. Those are at some point in the notice, the time to cure, then if it's not cured, then it goes through a process. You all have several issues on your agendas, you know, especially during the warmer months. I would say there's 2, 3, 4 a year, or 2, 3, 4 a meeting, somewhere where you're, and those are things that have gone through, someone's reported it, and if it gets reported, it is acted on by our staff that day or the next day. And while there may be an exception out there to that, I would say, if the call went into the right place, or it came to one of you and you gave it to me, or it came to our office, it's getting down to Neighborhood and Development Services, and that is getting reported. That would account towards that 862 for the city. And then, you know, Trent can go in a little bit more detail, but there's the investigation, so our staff gets out, and then during different times of the year, that's quicker than others. The growing season is, it takes a little bit longer, but still within a pretty reasonable, at least in my experience in the communities I've worked in, where there's a fast turnaround there. Investigation happens, if there's a violation observed, the inspector will also kind of look to their left, look to the right, see if a similar condition, and this is all based on, well, you're picking on me. No, this was a complaint based. We went there, we looked at a violation, and if it's, well, that guy has it too, that guy has it too, they got cited too. I mean, we can say with a straight face, if there's other violations in the area, those have gotten reported too. So, after a period of time, if they haven't cured, there's a follow-up inspection. If the follow-up inspection isn't there, then it begins kind of that removal process. I think it's important to know that this is private property, right? I mean, so we're just not going to send crews in there right away and start messing with people's properties. There's a process, and Collaboration's awesome, but the statute speaks specifically to the rights of property owners, and the courts aren't going to allow us to waive those based on, just some policy whim of the city of Garden City or the city of Garden City in partnership with Finney County. Now, I do think there's a stark contrast in the volume of cases. By comparison, since January 1st of last year, there's been 22 reported violations in Finney County. Compare that again, 862 in the city of Garden City, 22 in Finney County.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a difference. Now, it's also a different process. There's a different way to adjudicate those. There's potentially some reasons why. I don't know. The enforcement isn't different. The enforcement's the same person, and they're working just as hard for Finney County as they are for the city of Garden City. I don't know if the threshold's higher. I don't know if it's a code review that's necessary. I don't know if it's maybe a reluctance on the part of those living in the county to, I think this could explain some of it. I don't think it explains the difference between 862 and 22. Like, hey, we moved out in the country to get away from,
Right.
big brother governments like city government. So there may be a reluctance to report a violation of a neighbor through formal channels and instead just kind of secondhand grumble about it.
And some of that might be, like, if they were there, like in this truck case, if they're reporting a violation because there's a truck, then they don't think it should be there, but it was conditional, that wouldn't be recorded as one of these 22.
Yeah, it would.
Because it's not, even if they're allowed, if it actually isn't a violation.
I would believe if the call would come in and say, we believe there's a truck not parked in accordance on a piece of property out in Finney County, that would get
That would still get
reported as a
counted? Okay.
violation, and it would be closed after the
Right.
investigation because it would be found that the Board of Zoning Appeals had
Conditional
approved a
use.
conditional use
Yep.
permit.
Okay.
So I'll turn around and try to still talk on the mic. That's correct, Trent?
Yes.
That's your
Okay,
understanding too, Vicky?
so then this
Yeah,
would be
yeah.
22 that comes through official channels.
So as a
that
guess, but
get in.
Vicky and Trent just both said yes for those playing at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would count towards
Okay.
those. So, what bottom line, if folks have a complaint, I would encourage them to call our staff.
Right.
There is an investigation now, to the point, and I've heard this too, well, I called and nothing was done. At least in the last 14 months, there's 862 documented cases on this 34-page report in about 6-point font that I can't read to you right now. That says there is something done. Now, was it found not to be in violation, and therefore whatever the person reporting it deemed to be undesirable didn't change? There's a reason for that. It didn't change because it wasn't in violation. So, kind of commensurate with this all coming up, I've received 2 anonymous letters. One probably had 15 code violations in an area, and then another one came in the other day that had 4 or 5 written similarly in a faux kind of reporting document. It was anonymous, so I can't report back, but I can report to you all that at least on the first document, 13 of the 14 were found to have a violation or in the process of being abated, the violation being abated or removed. Most of those by the property owner, which is the most desired outcome and the most common outcome. One of those was determined not to be in violation, but probably understandable why someone saw that and didn't like it, but it wasn't in specific violation, anything in the city code. So that's the other side of it, is the more things get reported, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that staff could come to you and say, hey, we're noticing that this gets reported often. However, whatever this specific thing isn't in violation of the code. Is this something you'd like to amend our nuisance code to include based on the number of reports? And we can track that data and follow that. It does appear from the 22 violations, and I've got copies of this report, these reports for everybody, of these violations, that there is a sizable number of the 22 that are related to to vehicles, non-conforming use, or trucks, which may not all be the exact thing that Vicki is bringing to your attention, but they could be similar. So some of those are getting reported. I wouldn't consider, well, even if all 22, well, all 22 were, that'd be a big number, but 4 or 5 on here really isn't a big tidal wave of cases getting reported. So that would either mean there's not, this isn't a widespread thing, or maybe as widespread as being suggested, or folks aren't calling them in.
Right.
Whether they're in conformance or not in conformance, if they were being called in, we would have it documented. So that's all I have. As for working with Finney County, we're always welcome to work with them. If this is a county issue, to the extent they want our input on county policy issues, we'd be glad to offer those. But unlike a lot of county issues that affect inside the city limits and outside the city limits, county code enforcement is strictly outside the city limits. So while we may be able to speak to our experience and things that work or don't work for us to be able to get the kind of volume we have and get the kind of results that we get, we could share maybe our what we've learned over the years. But we wouldn't be weighing in on a common policy where we decide to do something that
Right.
matches. The problem of trucks not having a place to park, though, is certainly a policy issue that we have a vested interest in. And I know that the Development Corporation's working on kind of business models around that. There's been a few projects over the years that we've tried to find appropriate zoning for that. And of course, that's crossed over into the Planning Commission. And so I would say that's a community issue. My definition of collaboration is, city government, county government, our planning board, Economic Development Corporation, chamber on occasion, all those folks chiming in to try to help find community-based answers to community problems. So I do think it isn't a law, it isn't passing a rule, or isn't hiring a bunch of inspectors to go around and proactively enforce code, but it is maybe trying to address the problem so that it doesn't wind up in neighborhoods.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
All right.
Couple other questions? Or comments maybe, and questions, I don't know. So I've heard these complaints with regard to the city as well, Matt, and I've had instances where people I've sold homes to, like my neighbor parks his semi-truck in his driveway and leaves it running. And so they report this to me over and over, and I was like, I tell them who they need to call. You need to call Neighborhood and Development. And they say they do, but the problem that we've had is that these guys are doing that at night, and the code enforcement officer isn't working at night, and I guess the code enforcement officer has to actually document it, see it. I have taken photos of these trucks. There's one that currently parks his truck either in his driveway or in the vacant lot next to his house all the time. I see it frequently. And I've taken pictures, but I don't know that really makes any difference if the code enforcement officer. So that's one issue, and there are other issues, but specifically we hear it a lot about this truck parking. Lana has told me that there may be something in the works with the Western Kansas corridor with regard to possibly some parking for these guys. So that certainly is something that would be helpful. But my question, I guess, is that, when we have these violations and you go and you say, okay, one in particular that I worked with these people on, they did finally get an officer over there, and they okay, don't do that, or I don't know if they give them a citation or just say, you can't do that. I don't know what the protocol is. But what is the protocol if they continue? Do they face stiffer penalties or something like that if they're a repeat violator?
Yeah, that's a good question. A few years ago, more than a few, but in my tenure, the commission streamlined in a calendar year, the first citation or the first notice inside the city limits has the statutorily required process. Subsequent violations can be cited without that statutory due process because it's deemed to have already been met. That does start over every calendar year, and that is, I believe, through the examination of some case law or an AG opinion, one of the two, based on stuff that had happened statewide with code enforcement. So that was the question about
Multiple offenses.
Multiple offenses.
Yeah.
Oh, the fines don't go up. Fines don't escalate. We could certainly investigate whether or not that's a possibility, and if there's any kind of threshold that the state government has for multiple violations. So that's something we can research. I would probably dispel the notion that our staff doesn't work after 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, even in code enforcement. So it's just simply not true.
Do we know if the county has a similar reporting with multiple infractions?
I'm going to hand that one off to Trent. I have no knowledge of the county's code enforcement process other than I remember at one point those things end up in front of the county commission a lot earlier than they do for us.
Okay, so Trent Maxwell, Director of Neighborhood and Development Services. So question is how do they end up in the commissions or?
So
county
like Matt was saying, like if they are cited the first time, it goes through all the channels and all the time periods and all that. But then if there's a subsequent one in the same year, it's just cited on site.
So with some of it, we don't do with grass in the county. That's
Right.
not one of the things we regulate, of course. It would be something similar to that because the due process is met with the first violation.
Right.
All subsequent are not. And that's a standard policy created by state law. Other cities have the exact same rules and processes in place. As far as if we get an in-op vehicle or something like that, we go back for another in-op vehicle. Does anything change? It doesn't. It's another case, another violation that we proceed as if it was the first one that year.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else from the commission? Are we sufficiently along that conversation? If we need to bring it up at another time, we can take it up with some stuff. I mean, I'd be interested if somebody has some specific cases, like what happened in this case. I think it'd be good. I'm sure Trent and everybody would sit down and say, here's the timeline of what happened, when it got reported, officially reported. Here's what's going on. I'm sure we'd be open to hearing those things.
I have one other question. So if this just is the topic that I hear so much about, but if there is a truck that is, I assume that's violating city ordinance, so could a police officer give a ticket? Okay, so they could actually report it to the police department.
Yeah, correct. And I've actually, in the last 3 weeks, seen 2 semis get tickets for being on roads that they aren't supposed to be on. So that also gets enforced now. It's just like saying the police department doesn't give tickets for running red lights because you saw somebody run a red light. It happens. Do people roll through stop signs? Yes, people roll through stop signs. Do our law enforcement officers cite that when they see it, or at least pull them over, give them warnings, ask them not to do it again? Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. So, but I've also seen trucks in places they aren't supposed to be, or hear a tractor trailer drive down Pioneer Road where I live and think, well, that doesn't belong there. And that can lead to conversations about, hey, if I hear that twice and it's on a Sunday night, both times around the same time, there's probably going to be a conversation about, hey, if whoever's in that section of town on Sunday night, might keep their eyes peeled for a tractor trailer in the neighborhood that's not supposed to be there. So
Yeah.
Matt,
that's a good point.
so when you say tractor trailer, I mean, you're talking either the truck
Well,
with
the
the
truck can't
trailer
be there
or the
either.
truck?
The
Okay.
truck can't be there, but
Okay.
yeah, try to stay away from, let's say semi-truck. Trucks are allowed, in certain kinds. And there's size and weight, and one person's definition of what that is may be different than what our codes or our statutes say. Now, if it's parked on the property, generally if the violation is on the property, it goes to code enforcement. If the violation is on the street, it goes to law enforcement. Now, when things are working right, and we've got folks that have been around a while that understand that communication goes across departmental lines. It's all the city of Garden City, but I'm also not so naive to understand that sometimes that's learned over time and may not be as snappy and as quick as we'd like it to be with some folks just starting up.
Awesome. Well, if you hear any other complaints, get them in contact with me or Matt or Trent, and we can continue on the conversation if it needs to be continued on. So, all right. Thank you, and thank you for bringing it up and taking time to discuss it. Anybody else from the public? This is the most successful town hall we've had in a while.
Hi, friends. Good evening. My name is Miranda Unruh, and I am coming tonight to express my concern about losing the 12 and under swim at the swimming pool this summer. I want to thank Aaron for coming. I've had a long conversation with him about this, so it's really just to express our appreciation for that swim and to hopefully get the opportunity to have it back. But they have done 12 and under swim for, I guess, the last several years, which I didn't know. Last year was the first year I had known about it. And from what I understand is it was not very sustainable, like monetarily and maybe with staff too. And so they decided if they had to cut a program, that would be the one they got rid of. From what I understood, it was like they had 22 a week on average. Is that? Yeah, that's what we had talked about. And so me and my gal pals that all have tiny tots were pretty disappointed because it is overwhelming to go to the big pool during regular operating hours when you've got 2 or 3, or some of us have 4 under 4. And so we did really appreciate that space and that time, and we're just disappointed to see it go. So I'm here requesting.
Right.
I say we're, but none of my gal pals showed up tonight.
You're their spokesperson.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're just hoping that, and when I had talked to Aaron, I had kind of like presented a couple different ideas, maybe once a month as opposed to every week.
Right.
I think maybe that would help improve attendance and maybe make it more sustainable. I think we would really like twice a month, but beggars can't be choosers, so we'll take what we can get. He did suggest family night, which is also a great option. However, some of us got little ones and family night runs a little too late for us. So, and we want the sun and the heat and the warmth,
Right.
you know? So I'm a local, I'm a native, I grew up here. I spent many summers at the swimming pool, and I just want the same opportunity for my kids.
Right. Well, thank you.
So, yeah.
Thank you. And Aaron, could you just come up and talk just a little bit about that swim program that was and some of those options that you ran through?
Yeah, so, when it was the big pool, that program was started, and I'm sorry, I don't know if it was when exactly it was
Right.
started, but it was a pre-existing program that we transferred into Garden Rapids. We ran it every Tuesday morning, and it ran from 10:30 to 12:15. We saw a total over 7 events of 154 people. So right around that 22 to 24 person on average. Obviously, sometimes we saw 30, sometimes we only saw like 15 or 18. So it does require 8 lifeguards to man the leisure pool. In the competition side, the comp pool, swim team is going on at that point. So we're not operating the fly time slides, or the diving boards, obviously. So it is geared, obviously, towards that younger crowd using the zero depth entry, the play structure, and the lazy river. The slides that wash out into either a straight washout or into the leisure pool are also operated. So there is the opportunity for them to use that if they meet the height requirement.
Right.
So in that conversation, it's a reasonable request to have it once a month. We're just trying to locate a date to do that once a month. Ideally, we'd like to do that each month, June, July, and August before we shut down for school. The primary concern was obviously it takes a lot to staff it,
Right.
and we weren't seeing that many users week over week. The other thing that we're factoring in is extra hours for guards, and guards are a high commodity right now. And so that will then push them into overtime depending on how big or small that staff is. If we have 60 guards that are actively working, probably not as big of an issue.
Right.
But when that starts to narrow down to 40 or 30, and we're pulling that 1 to 8, 6 days a week, 1 to 6 on Sundays, plus events on Fridays, plus rentals, and plus swim team, those hours tend to add up. And so part of that is trying to manage the hours to a piece of trying to get the biggest bang for our buck. So that's kind of where that came from. I briefly spoke about it last year at the end of the season report. Just, again, looking at the participation. Obviously, we're a service, so it's not all about making money. So that's why I do agree, and I appreciate the suggestion of probably once a month. And from, I guess, my perspective, that's a pretty reasonable request that we should fulfill.
Right. So if you feel, we'll see how this once per month goes, and if there's really good turnout, then there's probably evidence to kind of maybe expand that in the future years.
Yeah. So again, sometimes
Staffing.
my running joke, if you know anything about Coca-Cola, it's like new Coke, right? Take it away and then bring back the original flavor, and it's more popular than ever. So yes, so that could have that factor. Part of it is what we talked about is the ability to get the word out.
Right.
So it sounds like maybe the marketing piece, we need to re-examine what we're doing that. But I have no problem expanding programs, assuming that we can staff them and we're getting the participation that we need to make it a viable program.
Good deal.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Any other? Yes.
I was just gonna speak on like the advertising portion. I was just gonna talk about the advertising portion Aaron had mentioned. Last year was the first year I had heard about it, and that's not my first year being at home with my babies, so I did take advantage of it as much as I could. However, I had to hear about it through a friend, which I thought was wild because I'm a native and I'm local, but I'm not on Facebook. And so, and I haven't been for probably 12 years. So there's a lot that I don't hear and a lot that I don't see. And so something like Aaron and I had discussed is like how we could better advertise, because I think attendance would be a lot greater if people knew about it. I just think there's a large community that doesn't know, like a lot of us that were going stay at home with our babies and they're not in school yet, so if you're advertising through the schools, that's not something we get to hear about. There's several groups and clubs that do cater to like our age group of babies right now, and I think it would be in our best interest to start there, but in the past I haven't seen anything like that. So suggestions on how to better advertise for 12 and under, because like I said, I know me and my group really, really appreciate it, and I think a lot of people would. They just don't know. So that's all. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
No, yeah,
Aaron,
thank you for bringing it up.
having me.
Thank you. All right. Anybody else from the public? Commission have anything to bring up?
I just saw him talking social media, it was a parent from Jenny Wilson Elementary School thanking one of the officers for patrolling the area just to keep traffic at a slower pace. And, it's great to see that we have officers patrolling around the schools just for the safety of our students. So kind of nice to see that, and that shout out to the officers. And so that's what I wanted to bring up. I also had somebody asked about if we could get some lights, the flashing lights at the Pioneer Trail up on Belmont. So the students are waiting in the morning to try to cross the Belmont to get to Bernadine Sits. And I had somebody suggest that if we could get get that intersection painted, or they said the flashing lights
Right.
that we have on other trails. So they asked me if we could look into that.
I saw Mike writing that down there, so I bet he's already on it.
And again, that's just a safety thing where, students are trying to get across the street in the morning. We have a lot of traffic there, so.
Makes sense.
Commissioner Euler or Ortiz?
I think on that same note for crosswalks, I was asked if there could be one located, and I thought there was one there. I'm not sure. It's across the street on Mary, just north of, where the dome is,
Mm-hmm.
to the east on that street by Stoss Dental. Is there one there? But somebody said it's not working, it looks like there's one there, but it doesn't work, and I thought, well, I don't know if it was there or not, but,
Like a
Yeah, we'll have
flashy
to-
one?
yeah, something. There is a crosswalk, there is the white lines across the road there, but I don't remember it might have been just a yellow flashing light for a school light, but I don't think it was one for crossing, so. Just
Okay.
So,
right off the lines of that, someone had asked about that crosswalk.
and that's going across Mary.
It's going north across Mary from the dome, so
Okay.
from the northeast corner of that,
From that field?
Oh.
from that field. And I think it's actually on the east
I
side
don't
of
think
that.
there, I don't think
Okay.
there is one, no.
Yeah, I don't know of one there, so, okay. Well, the
I
only.
drive that street all the time, I just
Yeah.
I've never
I know.
looked at it, watching the road.
Well, the only other thing I was gonna say is it's good to see Danielle and Derek in the
Yes.
audience. They're joining the city here, and great to have them aboard, and looking forward to making Garden City better, so great additions, so.
I
Anything?
just noticed as I was coming, doing a great job of communicating that our spring cleanup's coming. And
Yes,
I noticed that people are already starting to put everything on the curb. Just be mindful of the rules and regulations of spring cleanup. It starts on April 4th, but again, there's a whole list of items and rules and regulations for spring cleanup. But it is a great service that we provide our community just to keep our community nice. So just, if you don't know all the rules and regulations, it is on the website. And I know they've posted it on Facebook as well, or the social media sites that we have.
I think we should also be mindful of the weather too. I know that was last year and a couple years before, it had rained with mattresses outside, and that
Right.
made it a little tough for the workers to get those into the trucks. So I think we're supposed to get moisture on winds tomorrow night, so.
good deal. All right, well, thanks for coming
all I
out,
got.
successful town hall.